Yeah, I discovered lots about mushrooms which I didn't know. I had no clue about. I mean, I used to, enjoy the odd mushroom in a risotto or with a Sunday fry up, maybe. But I didn't realize quite how many thousands and thousands of species there are, and the fact that they're closer to animals than they are to plants as well. So they're not actually members of the plant kingdom.
That's crazy.
And about a third of our, you know, the earth we're standing on is made up of fungi and their mycelium, their network, and you know, incredible organisms. How they can produce uh, these mushrooms that suddenly appear after a bit of rain and grow massively and then disappear again for another year. It's incredible, and it turns out they are potentially a real lifesaver for the planet if we can harness them right, because they have an amazing amount of nutrients in them and are very, very high in protein levels as well. So it doesn't regard which species they are. And they have this meat-like quality to them that humans can recognize, the so-called umami flavor. So they're often used to disguise dishes, particularly Italian sauces that they couldn't quite afford the meat, so they just put in mushrooms, and it's well known for centuries how you can do that. And it turns out that not only is they high in all these nutrients, if you leave them in the sun, they actually, like humans, produce vitamin D. So rather than taking highly controversial supplements.
This is after you've cut them and put them in a basket, or while they're still still connected to the rest of the fungus.
Well, I've seen data show that both, so they can actually still produce it, because many plants do actually stay alive even once you've cut them from the rest of the family, if you like. They will continue to still be alive, and so we don't totally understand this, but it's now done commercially, so you can buy especially vitamin D enhanced ones, but many mushrooms contain natural amounts of vitamin D, and I think we're going to see more and more of that, as if our other sources might be drying up if we're having too much ultra processed food. So that's interesting. They like to absorb the sun like we do, and convert in their skins, in a way, precursors into this vitamin D, which they obviously use themselves, and vitamin D is very good for our immune system. But we know that my particular views are that vitamin D supplementation has not really succeeded in preventing many diseases at all. So natural forms of vitamin D are really important.
The last topic where I think you said you really changed your mind, and that is ultra processed food. And maybe, Tim, you just start by explaining what ultra processed food is, and then explain how you've really changed your views about it.
So the language around processed foods is complicated, because most food we eat is processed to some extent. So even something like butter or milk can be considered processed, because it's not just eating the raw plant, or just cutting that bit of meat from the animal and eating it. But what we mean by ultra processed is when the food itself no longer resembles the original ingredients, so that you are using extracts of plants or meats that no longer are the same as those original members, and you're putting them together in a factory in a way that you lose all the structure of those original foods, and you're just taking bits of them from a sort of chemistry set. And they tend to have at least 10 ingredients, and to make them stick together, they've often got these glues or gums or thickeners to make them seem like real foods again. So they're like reconstituting these foods. And this is unfortunately what constitutes 50% of our diet in the UK and 60% of our diet in the US.
Which is an enormous number, right? So you're saying, half to well over half of everything you eat is this sort of rebuilt food, instead of something which bears any real resemblance to the diet that we clearly ate until 100 years ago.
Absolutely right. And not every country does this. So there are countries in Europe and the Mediterranean, like Portugal, that only have 10% of their food in that way. So it's definitely something that affects particular countries that maybe lacked a food culture, but also had very strong business links and lobbying links of the food industry to point us in this direction. And, and the fact that we went for new, modern, scientific foods that may be easier to cook with and cut out a lot of those old time-wasting methods. But at what cost? And I think when I first started writing this book 6 years ago, the emphasis was all about, they have high in sugar, they're high in fats, they're high in salt, and that basically if you reduce those three things, you can make them healthier. And that's still the main establishment government approach to ultra-processed food, and one that the food industry is quite happy with, because they can keep substituting different chemicals to reduce the sugar by adding artificial sweeteners. They can reduce fat levels by increasing carbohydrates and other sugars and sugar alcohols, etc. And they can reduce the salt by, again, tampering with the structure of the food and using different preservatives. So all of it you can get round. But I think what I found was that there was some new research showing that ultra-processed food works not through those the bad effects of those chemicals, those three sort of macronutrients, if you like, but actually it's the whole process. It's these extra chemicals that act in two ways to really harm us. First is our gut microbes through the chemicals like emulsifiers and thickeners that and artificial sweeteners that in most people, and this might be personalized as well, our gut microbes react to and produce chemicals that make us sicker than if we weren't eating them, and might make us more hungry, might send signals to the brain to overeat and put on weight, and generally mess up our gut microbiome.
So basically there are chemicals in this, just to play, make sure that we're all following. You're saying now you feel there's these chemicals in this ultra-processed food, which are sort of directly triggering actions in these trillions of bacteria, which are then creating their own chemicals that really affect our health and our brain and things like that. Is that what you're saying, Tim?
Yes. So it's not a direct effect. It's as you said, it's through our gut microbes, which I think we need to think of as like these pharmacies where they're producing chemicals for us instead of our body. And sometimes they produce the same chemicals that our body produces, but through an alternate pathway. And something that we're just learning more and more about all the things they produce. So this is a very new science, but it's showing us how things that we thought were completely inert, like artificial sweeteners, like carrageenans,